If you know someone who is suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's, you don't want to miss this program. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching Real Possibilities today. We're talking about brain health, Alzheimer's, dementia, and it's been said that either you know someone with dementia or you may have dementia, but it impacts everybody. It impacts our lives every day. And there's no one better to talk about what we can do, to talk about what's going on in the area of dementia than our own Dr. Counts. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Doctor.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Why don't you tell folks a little about your own credentials, because we're going to get into a lot of good information. We want to establish your credibility first.
Well,
we didn't just pull you off the street,
this guy know what he's talking about, right? Well, no, I have been studying Alzheimer's disease and related dementias for about 30 years. I did my graduate work at Emory University. I did my postdoctoral and early career assistant professorship work at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. And then I was recruited to Michigan State in 2013. So I've been here 12 years, and it's been a real blessing to be at Michigan State and be able to watch the program, our Alzheimer's disease and dementia research program, expand and flourish and really be able to make some impact.
What have you learned? I mean, in the time from the beginning when you first started, what's changed? Any progress?
Yeah, well, a lot of progress. I think the thing that's important to remember about Alzheimer's disease is that it's what we call a multifactorial disease, right? So that makes therapy a really difficult problem to tackle because what we're coming to understand is that there's just not going to be a silver bullet, right? And so you're probably going to need a combinatorial therapy. We're starting to understand more about the genetics that are involved in the disease. We're starting to understand more about the risk factors that are involved in the disease. And so between a combination of maybe what we would call personalized medicine, right? So maybe the ultimate goal is to have a cocktail of different alternative therapies that you could have, but they're tailored to the individual, possibly depending on your genetic makeup. And then, like I mentioned, there are also risk factors that seem to be well established, and they are typically modifiable risk factors, meaning there are things you can do about them. So that's been a revelation as well.
And so there are different stages, right? I mean, people don't always start out with a full dementia. It seems as though there's progression. Right.
So I think the main difference between Alzheimer's disease and, say, for instance, sort of the second major cause of dementia, which is more like vascular dementia, is that, and that comes from like strokes that are sort of in the wrong part of the brain. They're in those cognitive regions, right? Or sort of some of those areas of the brain that are sending signals back and forth between different regions of the brain. So they just interrupt your thinking skills, right? But Alzheimer's disease, again, is a more slowly progressing disease. We now are coming to appreciate that it probably begins decades before symptoms. On the one hand, that tells you that your brain is very resilient and it's able to sort of reorganize and deal with the sort of mounting pathology. On the other hand, that makes detecting it harder, right? The early stages, because by the time people have symptoms, there's been a lot of sort of damage that's already occurred, right? So it's a more gradual onset, and it's mainly sort of short-term memory that you see impacted first. Whereas, say, with vascular dementia, it's more of a rapid onset because suddenly, with a stroke, you have that cut off of blood supply to these a cluster of neurons in a cognitive brain region, and then so suddenly they all just sort of die off, and so the effects are more immediate. And a lot of times with the vascular dementia, what you see are early deficits more in executive function, like planning and making decisions and sort of working memory. So suddenly you can still remember everyone and things, but you have a little trouble doing your job that you've been doing for 40 years, right? So things like that.
People sometimes have the misperception, I think, about what the kind of life you can live once you've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or some form of dementia, you can still have a pretty good quality of life. It's not a death sentence.
No, absolutely not. And there are studies also we talked about, so some of the risk factors that we can go into more detail are, basically what I always say is what's good for your brain is good for your heart, right? And so that, sort of my, the cocktail party response when people ask about this, right, is like, well, keep your blood pressure normal as well as you can, and keep your blood sugar normal as well as you can, because that's protecting all those blood vessels in your brain that are supporting all those neurons that are in your brain, right? And so in addition to controlling your medications like that, there's diet and exercise, right? And then also in addition to things that keep your heart and those brain vessels healthy, there's cognitive, but just sort of continuing to try to learn things, and that becomes more difficult as your memory and thinking problems progress.
Yes.
Right. But you can still have a good quality of life, and I think what's important about that is having a good support system, being able to stay socially engaged, right? Even if, say, you can't really do, crossword puzzles anymore, right? You can still maybe sit around and, in your good moments, sort of reminisce about things, right?
Yes.
So, it's important for the care partners and family members to understand that at some point they won't be recognized anymore, right? But not to take it personally, right?
You mentioned some of the factors and their early stages that earlier on that there's the tendencies for whatever the cells are there for dementia. It can't be detected earlier on, you were saying, but are we making progress in that? And if you can find out, like whether it's genetics or whatever, if you can find out that someone has the propensity for or the tendency to become an Alzheimer.
Right. So there is one main genetic risk factor. So there are a couple of gene mutations that you can get that actually are they cause hereditary Alzheimer's disease. So so some of these, so in other words, if you have this gene mutation, you basically will get the disease, and it'll actually occur in an earlier stage. But that's actually pretty rare.
Okay.
Okay, probably 3%, something like that. But the vast majority of cases just arise from what we call sporadic etiology. So we're not really sure. It's a combination of things,
So it's not genetics.
like genes and just things that have occurred. You've accumulated over 6, 7, 8 decades, right? A lot goes on during that time, right? Yeah. So there is a main genetic risk factor, and it can be tested for, and it's called the ApoE gene. And there's a particular subtype of this gene called the ApoE4, and that tends to predispose people to Alzheimer's disease. And that's actually helpful for research because now we can study, okay, what does that gene do, right? What pathways are it involved in? And a lot of them turn out to be related to vascular health as well. But as far as diagnosis, and I mentioned that the disease, we think it starts, maybe decades before symptoms,
right.
And it's like anything, right? So like you'd rather catch cancer in stage 1 than stage 4, right? Just like that. So we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we catch people as early as possible? And so we have now imaging. PET scans, and so and I think most folks hopefully at home have heard just in the popular press that the two main pathologies for Alzheimer's disease are those plaques and the tangles, right? And without going into too much detail about that, and they now have these PET scans that can detect the plaques and the tangles in you, and while you're just sitting there alive, right?
Wow.
But the problem with that, of course, is that it's expensive and it's real specialized. You need to be at a major medical center that's going to be able to do those scans. So the FDA actually just approved of a blood test, and it's called the Illumipulse. Okay, and so the importance of this is if you have concerns about what's going on with yourself or your loved one, you can go and maybe request this test, right? And so what this test, it actually measures the amounts of the proteins that are involved in the amyloid, in the plaques and the tangles. And what they showed was that a positive blood test in the clinical trials meant that like 92% of the time a positive drug test meant that you had positive PET scans for the plaques in your brains, right? But the other important thing is that 97% of the time, if you had a negative test, you would be negative for those plaques building up in your brain. So it can also kind of rule out maybe that you have Alzheimer's disease. And so that would help a doctor say, well, you may not have Alzheimer's disease. It could be, again, if it's a sudden onset, it may be more vascular, but sometimes it's just, you have a new medication and they're just mixing wrong and it's just creating confusion. Right. And so
when you find out early, is there a treatment that does it? Can you prevent it from maturing?
So prevention's obviously the goal, and I think honestly we're still sort of a ways off on that one. So right now the goal is to try and slow things down, right? Once it's detected. And so there are now 2 FDA approved, so our sort of old line of medications, these so-called cholinesterase inhibitors like Aricept, or some of the others, Namenda is another one that people take. Those just go after symptoms. So they're like symptomatic treatments, but a lot of times they have really bad side effects for your belly and things like that. And so they're not well tolerated. But these new drugs are actually immunotherapies that are designed to get rid of those plaques that build up in your brain. Okay, and 2 of them have been FDA approved. Well, 3 have been FDA approved, but 1 was taken off the market because the side effects were too great, and I think the clinicians just didn't think it was worth the risk, and that's always the thing, right? You want the most benefit for the least amount of side effects, right? And so these, in the clinical trials, 1 is called, and you should probably be seeing these on TV soon, if not, if you haven't already, but 1 is called lecanemab, which is the trade name is Leqembi. And in the clinical trials, they showed that there was over about an 18-month period, there was a 27% slowing of cognitive decline in the people that were taking the drug versus the placebo. And so, that's not...
It's hopeful.
It's helpful, right?
Hopeful.
Helpful and hopeful. It's not like the high impact, effect that we're really going for, but it's a start. And so these amyloid immunotherapies, and by immunotherapy we mean it's an infusion, right? So they have these custom antibodies that go into your brain and attack these plaques and get rid of them. And that seems to improve symptoms. And then the other one is called donanemab, and its trade name is Kisunla. So whoever comes up with these names, right? And that one actually, over an 18-month period, showed a 35% improvement or slowing of cognitive decline. So again, a little bit better. They still had the same potential side effects, and the main side effects are brain swelling and brain bleeds, which is pretty significant, right? But it's only like maybe but it's like 20% or so of the patients. But what they'll do is they'll monitor you with like an MRI or whatever, which is relatively inexpensive and usually covered by healthcare plans, and so they can sort of monitor to make sure you're not having those sort of silent symptoms, right?
Are you hopeful that in your lifetime there'll be a cure?
I'm sort of running out of time for me, right? Yeah. So, so cure maybe not, and of course you always want to say yes. But the reality, and what I've understood over doing this for 30 years is that the advance of science is slow. We're about 50 years behind cancer research as far as a real push to understand what's going on with the disease, right? And so, and so we're still having trouble, fighting cancer, right? And so it may not be a cure, but I think these sort of multimodal efforts to slow things down. And so I mentioned just these 2 FDA-approved drugs. There are also many drugs sort of in the pipeline, right? And so Some of these drugs are targeting the tangles that are in your brain.
Okay.
In fact, the FDA just fast-tracked one of these drugs. It's in a phase 2 clinical trial, which means it's a smaller scale trial, and they're just trying to figure out the right dose and make sure it does have a benefit. But they're trying to fast-track it, so if it does look like very promising, they can recruit and start a phase 3 trial as fast as possible, so then it could come to market faster. And then there are other drugs that we call, again, these disease-modifying drugs, so slowing things down, right? No intention necessarily of stopping it, just trying to be realistic. Right, but then they're targeting other aspects like inflammation that occurs in the brain and different stress responses that occur in the brain, and just keeping all those connections in the brain, talking to each other efficiently. They're drugs sort of designed to sort of boost those brain functions.
What are some of the early signs of dementia?
Yeah, so I mentioned that with Alzheimer's disease, and we can just talk about that, I guess, mainly since that's the main cause, right? Again, it's a short-term memory deficit at first, right?
Right. But what does that look like when you say short-term memory? How do you recognize it?
So it would be, for instance, it would be like just not remembering things that just happened to you, right? Or asking the same question about the same thing over and over again, like where are we going again? And you've heard the answer, but you can't just lay that memory down. Or just repeating the same story, right, over and over again. And so that might be a good segue into like what's normal and what's a concern, right? So, like my daughter would say, you've told me that story 100 times, right? But we get older and we have these things that were funny or poignant in our life, and you forget some along the way, and you tend to start focusing on the same stories. And that's just see, I think that's just normal, right? Yeah. But when you're just saying the same thing over and over again, and it's not necessarily important or something, so
someone once said that if you go downstairs and you can't remember what you went downstairs for, that's one thing. But if you go downstairs and you don't know where you are, that's concerning.
So that would be the next one I would come up with. Walking in the room and why were you there? Why am I here? That happens all the time, right? But usually you can go after a while. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. I came down to do that, right? But the difference would be someone just walking around the house and not knowing why they're there or where they are, that sort of thing. Sort of wandering, I guess you would say. Another one would be word finding. Right, so a lot of times there's this great vocabulary word we used to use all the time, and now we can't find it. Or it's an acquaintance, like I knew this person when our kids played sports together, and now I'll see them in the grocery store. It's like, oh gosh, who was that? That's normal, right? But what would be abnormal would be not being able to name something that's very commonplace in your life, right? Something that you use every day, or a person that's close to you, like a friend. And of course, once you get to family members, it's obviously a little more serious. And I think the last one I would mention would be losing your train of thought. Which I'm sure I'll do at some point in this interview, right? And I think that's normal, but what would be abnormal would be just not being able to really carry on a conversation because you just can't keep track of what's going on, right? And so I think those are some of the early signs. And then there's activities of daily living, right? So, these are things that you've been doing sort of automatically, since you were a teenager or a young adult. Working household appliances, shopping, cooking, your morning care routine, things like that. So most of us can do that automatically, and don't. And if we can do that, then I think we're still okay, right? But it's when you kind of forget how to do some of those things.
We have about a minute left. If people are witnessing any of these signs, what should they do? What would you suggest the first step of course of action for them?
Yeah, I would say the first thing would be to go to see your doctor, right? Maybe ask for one of these blood tests, right? There are community resources. The AARP, along with the Alzheimer's Center the Alzheimer's Association, has a community resource finder, and I think it's at the AARP website, and it's also at a website for the Michigan Dementia Coalition, which is a Michigan the statewide group
Right.
of concerned people that
Right.
are sort of coming together to advise the state on how to make Michigan a dementia-capable state.
Yes.
And then there's the Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Research Center that involves researchers from Michigan and MSU and Wayne State, so it's a statewide effort.
Thank you. So please get help. Know you're not alone, and make certain that you check out those resources. Thank you so much, Doctor. Appreciate you being here today.
You're welcome.
Bone density. The older we get, we go to the doctor, they always want you to do a bone density test. Why, and why is that important?
Extremely important. So the number one preventable cause of early death in the aging population is osteoporosis and bone health. Extremely important to make sure that your bone density is managed, you're aware of, and you know your risks moving forward.
When you say managed, how do I manage my bone density?
Well, foods you eat, exercise that you do, especially light to medium weight bearing exercises, and also medications that are out now can actually reverse a lot of the bone losses that we have, which start after the age of 28 to 32.
28, you're actually starting to lose bone density?
Yep. Peak bone mass happens around 31, 32 years of age, and you start losing that bone density as time goes on, and it becomes more progressive after menopause, or the male version of that.
And when you say the medications that you take?
Yes, there's a number of new medications and old medications that are on the market with minimal side effects that actually can help reverse and rebuild your bones.
What happens if you lose your bone density? What are the consequences?
Well, fractures anywhere in your body, losing height, which is big and people forget, it might not kill you, but it's very uncomfortable to lose 6 inches of height and be stuck in this position as you get older. And of course, slipping on ice in the wintertime and breaking your hip. That's tens of thousands of dollars and possibly even death.
So do you want to stay in the wintertime?
No, you want to be exercising and you want to have strong bones so you're not worried about that, and you have muscle mass so that you're not slipping to begin with.
Will you lose muscle mass no matter what you do as you age?
Well, I can't make anyone live forever, but you sure can slow it down.
Oh, that's always good news. Thank you, Dr. June.
CATA's regional mobility solutions can help seniors seize the day. Hear what riders and community leaders have to say about the value CATA brings to the lives of aging adults.
CATA and Ready Ride have been wonderful with my services I need. Been using about 8 years, and I use Ready Ride and CATA. Well, the reason I like the Ready Ride service is, you know, they take me where I need to go, and the drivers, they wonderful too, you know. They let the ramp down and I ride on and they raise me up and I ride on, they strap me in. If I have extra bags or whatever, you know, they're always willing, you know, to take them to the door. They never go in, set them outside, you know, and all that. And then they always conversational with them, you know. You know, we just talk about everything, you know. I'm a veteran. Went to the military in 1967. Went to Vietnam, you know, did my time over there, came back. If I had to do all over again, would do it for serving my country, you know. Yeah, just learned I could ride, you know, without paying now, you know, which is wonderful. Yeah, I appreciate it.
I ride free because I'm a veteran. I use CATA 3 or 4 times a week. I use Ready Ride mostly. Sometimes go shopping. I ride free, and I appreciate that. Well, that's really something I don't have to pay to get on. Then I know that I can call them up, and they're pretty good about being punctual and stuff like that. I'll say that. And it's very important that I ride with them because of CATA. I can do that. I'm independent.
I'm Tracy Anderson with Empire Alliance at Michigan State University. Today I'm here with Jennifer Digman from Mount Pleasant. We're going to talk about her advocacy around MS, around direct care in Lansing, as far as Washington, D.C. Tell me about it, Jennifer.
Oh, good heavens, there isn't enough time to, but it is so important. And I was diagnosed with this disease, and I realized that I need to use my voice. I'm fortunate to have direct care workers, people that come into my home to help me stay in my home. And I think I need to be an advocate because not everyone has the voice or feels comfortable talking about what an impact direct care workers make. And I enjoy sharing my story to make a difference so that other people can have the opportunities to stay in their own home and not have to go to a setting that's not as conducive to day-to-day happy existence.
How important is it for you to share your voice?
It is so important, and it feels really good. There's not a lot I can do as far as walking or working, but I can share my story to try and help other people understand that direct care workers benefit me, benefit the community, and it makes me a more valuable member of my community, my life, because they add to my reality and make me feel more powerful, because my disease makes me weak, but they make me strong.
I love that. Thank you, Jennifer. To learn more about Impart Alliance and our advocacy around direct care, please visit our website at impartalliance.msu.edu.
You ever have questions about nursing homes and whether they accept Medicaid or not accept Medicaid? That's why David's here.
Well, you know, there's such a huge misconception about that. Everybody thinks, oh, nursing home, Medicaid. You know, Medicaid nursing homes, they're the bad ones, or, you know, they smell bad and everything's terrible. The reality is that at $13,500 a month on the low end to $18,000, $20,000 a month on the high end, nobody can afford to pay for nursing home care.
Right.
That's why every nursing home, with very few exceptions, almost 100% of nursing homes, the very nice ones, maybe the more budget-oriented ones, they all accept Medicaid to be paid. But then people will say, oh, yes, but there's just a few people on the Medicaid. The federal numbers are around 70%. I say 80% of the folks in nursing home right now, whatever nursing home you care to go to, on average, are going to be on the Medicaid, because nobody's got $18,000 a month to pay for it. Nobody. And that's why people wind up on the Medicaid. And this whole idea, oh, there's only a few Medicaid beds, not true. Medicaid will pay for any Medicare certified bed. You know, I know we're getting into the weeds of this a little bit.
Are they required to do that?
Yes, it's a state law. Every Medicare bed is automatically dual certified as a Medicaid bed. Medicaid will pay
But there's
for
only
any
so
Medicare
many
bed.
of them in each facility, right?
There are a certain number of dedicated Medicaid beds, and they say that so they can say, oh, I'm sorry, we have no Medicaid beds available. The
Good
reality
information.
is, if you're in there, Medicaid will pay.
Thank you for that, David. Good to know. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you for watching Real Possibilities, and just remember, you're not alone. There are resources out there to help you no matter what your situation or concerns are. Check out the resources, news you can use. Thanks for watching Real Possibilities.